So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to discuss about the Tamerlane and the Sword of Islam. So, first, let us all know who is Timur. Timur was born on April 9, 1336 to February 18, 1405. He was a Turco-Mongol conqueror and the founder of the Timurid Empire in Persia and Central Asia and the first ruler in the Timurid dynasty. So, in Turkey, the Timur word means iron. So Timur was the last of the great nomadic conquerors of the Eurasian steppe, and his goal was a restoration of Genghis Khan Great Mongol Empire. So Genghis Khan, who had died in 1227, and Timur shared a common ancestor. So Timur is the most prominent new man or known for an English corruption of Timur Lenk, and during his rise the power he had suffered an arrow wound in the leg and he limped throughout his life. So this injury failed to curb his explosive energy. So Tamerlane military success was in effect a repeat of the Rutun system favored by Genghis Khan. So at the time when tribal loyalties were under pressure from the abandonment of nomadic life, Tamerlane recruited the personal followers rather than troops. So these ex-nomads were joined by men from a sedentary population who served as foot soldiers and fighters. So through the export of violence from Central Asia, Tamerlane ensured the revival of the Silk Road as the major route for international trade, the profits from which allowed him to establish its cities. So in his scholars, scientists, poets, philosophers, and artists, he gathered from the countries and he conquered all of them. So although he deliberately acquired a reputation for ruthlessness to overweigh subjects and opponents alike, Tamerlane was conscious of the need to balance cruelty with generosity. In such a violent age, his behavior was not exceptional, as his method of advertising a victory and that those people were Muslims and did not worry, and the Sword of Islam from the city had refused to accept the terms and obliged him. So for his religion, Tamerlane relied in Islamic symbols and language to bring legitimacy to his conquest, and often referred to himself as the Sword of Islam. So kagaya ng sinabi ko, he supported educational and religious Islamic institution and encouraged the Borgian leaders to convert to Islam. So itong si Timur gusto niya is mapadami pa yung mga member na kanyang sinasakupan. So Tamerlane saw no contradiction between bloodshed and Islam. So the transition from slaughter on a battlefield one day to quiet reflection in a mosque the next posed no moral problems from him. While his army was finishing off the destruction of Baghdad, and he went to the nearby tomb of a famous cleric to explore the aid of this saint. So what Tamerlane demanded was obedience to his order. The inhabitants of Baghdad paid with their lives for defying them, and in comparison with his Muslim enemies, Christian, Jews, and Hindus escaped lightly. Only occasionally, as though to make up for the massacres of fellow Muslims, would Tamerlane unleash his fury against them too. So he decided to build an empire. So Timur inherited a system of rulership that he used for both nomadic and settled populations. Compared to Genghis Khan, the control and use of settled population was much more important to Timur. So, for his pagkatapos niya mag-build ang empire, ganun na lamang kung gaano kainggitan ng mga ibang lugar or empire si Timur. So, for medieval European kings, dreaded and the possibility of Tamerlane advancing westwards. So, they had no need to worry because the Central Asian conqueror was uninterested in any renewal of the Crusades, unlike the Ottoman Turks. So quite unnecessary was the praise heaped on him by Charles VI of France, who thanked this and most victorious and Syrian prince for the Enlightenment treatment of Christian merchants traveling in his empire. Because of Tamerlane was most anxious that international commerce should flourish once again, seeing which the way he wind was blowing and Genius colony at Pera, just across the Golden Horn, and Constantinople had already professed his allegiance and raised Tamerlane's flag. So after that, this Tamerlane decided to have his own army. So Timur's army was organized into two men, which were military units. Each was comprised of 10,000 men. The army was famous not just for being extremely fierce and violent, but also for its heterogeneity. It included soldiers from Timur's heartland as well as from more recently conquered lands, and was described by contemporary sources as a huge conglomeration of different people. So people from nomadic groups and people from settled populations, Muslim and Christians, Mongols as well as Anatolians, and various ethnicities such as Turks, Arabs, Tajiks, Georgians, Persians, and Indians among the tribes most loyal to Timur, were the Barlas and the Jalayir. After building his own empire, Timur also interested on Silk Road. So, Silk Road ambitions. Timur had a great interest in trade and wanted to reactivate and restore the Silk Road. His ambition was to keep the Silk Road under his control, even though that meant having to go to war with various nations and empires located along this enormously long route from west and east. So ito nga na gusto ring i-open ni Timur yung interest niya sa trade, and he wanted to restore the Silk Road. So although iniisip niya na marami siya maging competential like China, nagkaroon pa rin siya ng interest na buksan or mapakasa kanya ang Silk Road. So China in 1395, as one of the emperors Hongwu's embassies reached Samarkand and was promptly imprisoned by Timur. So pinakulong ni Timur si Hongwu, and Emperor Wang Wei and the first Ming ruler had been sending out to various former Yuan tributaries asking them to recognize. So Ming, as their overlords, Timur had no intentions of bowing to Ming. On the contrary, and he was plotting a campaign to seize control on the section of the Silk Road, so restore Yuan to its former Mongol glory and surpass Alexander the Great in his accomplishments as conqueror. So, but a concern with the profit derived from trade, he did not stop Tamerlane from planning an assault on China. So, in 1402, Emperor Yonglu succeeded Wang He as a leader of the Ming, and he was aware of Timur's less than friendly intentions, but did not send an ambassador to Samarkand. So this ambassador was imprisoned just like the first one in 1405 when Emperor Wang Wei decided to send also an ambassador para makausap si Timur, but this, Yongle launched a series of naval expeditions to the west to ensure that China would not become isolated if Timur attacked from the west by land. Now, Timur had been biding his time for several years and was anxious to get going. His general advised him to stay in Samarkand until spring, but Timur refused. Instead, he wanted to start moving his troops north right away along the Jas- Jakarta's river and be ready to attack China as soon as spring came.
He was born in the 1330s in the Chagatai Khanate, formerly the Mongol Empire in Central Asia. On the unforgiving steppe, he rose from a lowly sheep thief to become one of history's greatest conquerors, uniting nearly all of Central Asia, Afghanistan, and Iran under his rule. But was he a great state builder or a bloodthirsty tyrant?
Order, order. Who do we have on the stand today? Tamerlane?
Oh, that wasn't his name, Your Honor. The great Timur, meaning iron, was nicknamed Timur the Lame by enemies who mocked permanent injuries to his leg and arm. Injuries he sustained raiding a rival tribe's sheep herd. He was a thief and a scoundrel from the start. Maybe, we actually don't know for sure, but even if that's true, raiding rivals was just part of nomadic life at the time. Timur was not born into a ruling family, so he had to prove his worth through daring and horsemanship. He was hardly a commoner. Timur's family was minor nobility. His uncle and brother-in-law were high-ranking officials, and when they trusted Timur on a diplomatic mission, he defected to a rival Khan. Strategic maneuvering. He reconciled with his uncle and brother-in-law soon after, only for long enough to consolidate his own power. Then he went to battle against his brother-in-law, supposedly his closest ally. He was assassinated, and Timur seized power. They may have been friends, but he was a corrupt man who alienated a lot of people. Timur was right to oust him. Afterward, he managed to reunite most of the Khanate's territories and put an end to decades of bloody infighting.
Okay, so where are we? I can hardly keep up.
1370, Your Honor.
And he's Han now?
Well, not quite. Timur was not a direct descendant of Chinggis Khan, so he couldn't claim the title. Instead, he appointed figurehead Khans and referred to himself as Amir, or commander, and later as Guragan, or son-in-law, after he married a woman who was descended from Chinggis Khan. He claimed to be a divinely ordained protector of the Mongol and Muslim worlds, yet he undermined both Mongol and Muslim power by relentlessly waging war against his neighbors, weakening them so much that Christian Europe romanticized him as an ally. His campaigns killed as many as 17 million people. Propaganda. Timur's official biographies deliberately exaggerated the number of deaths to deter rebellions. Like the Mongols, Timur offered cities the chance to surrender and only ordered massacres if they revolted. He rebuilt irrigation canals to support agriculture and regularly distributed food to the poor. Just in his hometown of Kesh, he paid for the meat of 20 sheep to be given to the poor every day. His campaigns were brutal, but by unifying Central Asia, Afghanistan, and Iran, he was also able to reinvigorate the Silk Road. Much of Eurasia benefited from the revival of long-distance trade, and Central Asian cities such as Samarkand and Herat became thriving commercial hubs under his rule. And meanwhile, other cities like Baghdad, Aleppo, and Delhi were plundered and burned and took decades to recover. This illiterate warlord destroyed centuries' worth of cultural heritage, leaving nothing but pyramids of skulls in his wake. Timur may have been illiterate, but he was also an active patron of culture and the arts. During his conquests, he spared artisans and scholars, sending them to work on public projects like schools and mosques. Unlike many women in the world at the time, his wives, daughters, and daughters-in-law were highly educated and politically active. Timur also personally met with and impressed the famed Arab historian Ibn Khaldun in Damascus, and he so thoroughly mastered chess that he is said to have enjoyed a more complex variant that was named for him.
So, what happened after that?
Timur died from an illness in 1405 when he was likely in his early 70s. The empire he founded lasted another 100 years, ushering in an architectural, artistic, literary, and scientific renaissance across Central Asia. In Samarkand, Timur's grandson Ulugh Beg built the largest astronomical observatory in the world at the time. Even after the fall of Timur's empire, his descendant Babur re-established himself in India, founding the Mughal Empire, which would become home to nearly a quarter of the world's population and which built such splendors as the Red Fort and Taj Mahal. Timur's legacy is still celebrated in monuments across Central Asia, where he is remembered as Buyuk Baba Miz, or our great forefather. And yet today, in Europe, India, and much of the Middle East, he's remembered as a butcher. That's more a reflection of the success of his own propaganda than of the man himself.
Hold on now, I think I've almost got the king cornered.
Emerging from relative obscurity, Timur's conquests formed a legacy lasting nearly 500 years that remains on trial even today. Over 100 years earlier, Timur's predecessor conquered the Eurasian continent and rose to power. Genghis Khan became one of the most fearsome warlords in history, but was he only a vicious barbarian, or is there more to him than the legends let on? Put this notorious figure on trial with this video.